What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and in today's video we've got a pretty special PC build for you all. We're going to be building an awesome RTX 3080 build in this video, covering off all of the pros and the cons about today's build as we put it together. We're also going to take a deep dive into performance later, so you guys can get some exact FPS numbers in the likes of Apex Legends, Cyberpunk 2077, Fortnite, and many more. So without any further ado, let's do this. As usual, we're going to kick today's build off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible. And this is MSI's B550M Mortar. It's a fantastic B550 board that has all the features we need without breaking the bank. Because we've only got one M.2 drive and one GPU, we simply don't need an X570 motherboard. Plus, with some overclocking support on this board as well, a nice built-in rear I/O shield with 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, it really does cover off all the features and functionality we could possibly need for today's system. I'm going to be coupling our motherboard with the CPU choice for this build. I've opted for AMD's Ryzen 5 5600X, although the 5800X, the Ryzen 7 chip, is also a great choice if you want to do a little bit of streaming or content creation. This 6-core 12-thread chip is awesome when it comes to multi-threaded gaming applications, but also great with fast single-threaded clock speeds for the biggest AAA titles out there. GTA 5, Valorant, Fortnite are all pretty single-threaded titles, which makes this an awesome CPU choice. I'm honestly a huge fan of AMD's latest 5000 series. Intel have dropped the ball a little bit with 11th gen, and while the i5 is decent for the price, the Ryzen 5 is definitely the better option. Because we've gone for a Ryzen CPU, we need to make sure we've got a fast dual channel RAM kit to really get the best out of the processor, and that's where this Dominator Platinum from Corsair comes in. You could pick up some of their Vengeance Pro SL if you'd like to save a little bit of money, but the Platinum is great. This 32GB kit might sound a little bit overkill to some people, but for a 3080, 16 gigs of RAM simply isn't quite enough for some titles nowadays. The decision for me is still pretty 50-50. It is a luxury going for 32GB, but we want to make sure we can get the maximum performance out of our 3080. We can't believe in any FPS on the table. It also helps for this build, if I'm being honest, that the RAM looks incredible. With Corsair's Capellix RGBs on the top, you've basically got the brightest LEDs that you'll find on any RAM DIMMs on the market, which is a really, really nice bonus. With the RAM and the processor installed, all we really need to do before we move the motherboard into the case is just pop in our storage drive today. Now, to do this, we need to remove this M.2 heatsink that comes included with the motherboard. Simply put, we're not going to need it. So that can go, because we've actually opted for this. It's ADATA's Spectrix S20G. And this is a really cool NVMe drive with a difference. XPG seem to still be some of the only people who can make awesome RGB M.2 drives. Yes, that's right. This drive is addressable RGB. All of these little LEDs inside can light up 16.8 million colors to make sure you really do match that build aesthetic. What it also means is that you can't put back on the heatsink cover. Not that you'd want to, you'd hide away the RGB. And I think that drive is going to look awesome in our system today. With the motherboard assembly nice and complete, it brings us on to what must be the largest micro ATX case I've ever seen. I mean, look at the size of this case. I've handled ATX boxes smaller than this one. In all seriousness though, this is Antec's brand new Dark Cube Beyond the Limits chassis. I really like the design. I think the front mesh looks awesome. The I/O at the top with kind of like the symmetrical headphone and mic jacks, USB-C, tempered glass side panels. It's awesome. And your GPU is going to show up through the glass panel at the top. It's a really well thought out case and kind of reminds me of Corsair's Bumblebee case. I think they still make that actually. But all in all, I think it's going to look absolutely awesome. Bit of RGB, bit of logo illumination as well. It isn't mini ITX, it's instead the larger M-ATX, which I much prefer. So let's see if this thing cuts the mustard and really warrants the price tag, because it's not cheap. Look at this thing. It is absolutely ridiculous. And I think the front panel, the front panel kind of comes off. You can change this out for a non-mesh version as well, but we'll stick with the mesh for today's system. Antec, I promise I love your designs, but giving like a screw organizer and then a bag of screws that aren't organized in the organizer seems really pointless. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, at least they've organized the cable ties. Awesome stuff. That's looking pretty good, and our RAM also stands out with the motherboard screwed into the case. It brings us nicely on to the cooler choice for today's build, which is actually Cooler Master's ML240L. I've also picked up some Antec Antec fans to make the whole system kind of match in terms of airflow and RGB, so these are going to be awesome. But this cooler's a great value option, actually. 240mm is going to be perfect for a build like this. There is plenty of clearance for an air cooler, but I think a liquid cooler is going to work better in a tunnel, small form factor layout, where airflow is more important than it perhaps usually would be. Slight problem, ladies and gents. I didn't really think this through, but we need to rotate the radiator 180 degrees, so the tubes are at the bottom, and then that way we'll have enough clearance for the graphics card. And yes, you Gamers Nexus fanboys will be going, James, that's the wrong way to mount your radiator. But we haven't really got much of a choice, and a lot of research does show it doesn't actually wear your radiator down too much. It's not ideal, but hey ho. And following that minor interruption, we're now ready to move on to the GPU. Remember, ladies and gents, measure twice, fit once, and watch these videos so you don't have to make the same mistakes that I do. Now, this is the ASUS ROG Strix 3080. The Strix card is the top end card, really. MSI Supreme perhaps rivals this card, but you can check out our coverage of that on our website in the card section now. This is a really nice looking card though, with 3 RGB fans that are going to illuminate through the top of this chassis very, very nicely indeed. In fact, this case and its layout almost reminds me of ASUS's ITX case, our build of which you can check out in the card section here. Here goes nothing. I'm not feeling too confident given how tight this thing is in theory. Let's try and get it in there. Yes, yes, yes. Come on, come on. You little beauty. Come on, in you go. Yes, come on, yeah. It was never in doubt. Come on, look at that. Now all we've got to do is get the radiator back in. Okay. Would you just look at that? I don't want to gloat, but this is my happy dance. I will be the first to admit that the cable management does need a little bit of work, but now seems the perfect time to tackle that as we go ahead and install the final component of today's system, which is of course our power supply. Now this is the Antec's Earthwatts Gold Pro. It is a white power supply, but it's going to be hidden behind the shield, so we haven't got to worry about that. And the cables are black. It's 750 watts to be precise, which is the recommended amount for the RTX 3080, so that's really important to bear in mind. A 650 watt unit for a build like this is simply not going to be good enough. And while the system may boot okay, when you get power surges in games where your GPU needs that extra power, it will let the side down. So go for something like this and avoid any disappointment later. And with that, we're pretty much done. All we need to do is just plug up a couple of our cables and admire our hard work. That is one good looking system, and it's pretty unique as well. Let's take a look at exactly how this system performs once it's all booted up, but first, how good it looks in an epic glam montage. Watch, roll the montage. Lovely jubbly. Now we've put this system together, seen just how good it looks when it's all powered up. I personally think it looks great. Let's take a dive into the land of performance. On your screen now, first up, is a summary, a snapshot view of every single title we tested on this exact build to give you a really even, consistent picture in terms of performance. You can also find some temperature numbers on your screen as well to see how the Antec Dark Cube performs in that slightly smaller form factor. If you'd like to see the full, unedited gaming benchmark runs for all our titles today, check out the playlist in the cards section now on our benchmarking YouTube channel called Benched. Let's take a dive though into some of our focus titles, kicking things off with GTA 5. At 4K high settings, we got a really solid 114 FPS on average, with 102 and 90 for the 90 and 99th percentile FPS results. This is tested in both MSI Afterburner's Tuner software as well as NVIDIA FrameView to give us some really consistent results. We did use the GTA 5 inbuilt benchmarking mode as well, so you can replicate this exact performance run at home nice and easily. It's a similarly positive story for Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War. Here we tested at 4K high settings with DLSS enabled and got a pretty astonishing 100 frames per second on average. That's right, 100 FPS at 4K high settings, leveraging the power of DLSS. With 84 and 71 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, the average wasn't skewed by a few high results. Instead, the game performed consistently very, very well. Apex Legends at 4K is next up, 4K high settings in fact, and we got 135 FPS on average, with 125 and 111 for the 90 and the 99th percentile results. We did set the FPS to unlimited in the Origin in-game launcher, as for Apex it's more than just about the game's own settings, and to get these esports level frame rates at 4K is pretty astounding. In fact, if you'd like to see a video where we compare all the important and all the biggest GPUs on the market right now, you can find that video in the cards section here. Next up today is Valorant. Valorant, probably the easiest game of all to run. Maybe CSGO's a little bit easier. And at 4K high settings, we got 330 frames per second on average. This is a really, really great result. Valorant looked fantastic. And once again, this system demonstrates that you can play esports kind of titles at esports frame rates at 4K high settings, which is completely and utterly bonkers. Next up today then is a little bit of Cyberpunk 2077. We tested with both RTX off and RTX on, as well as with DLSS enabled and disabled. Let's kick things off with 1440p high, ray tracing on, DLSS on. Here we got 65, 58 and 51 FPS for our three FPS measures, which is actually pretty good for Cyberpunk at such a high resolution with ray tracing enabled. But what if you turn ray tracing off, keep the power of DLSS to give you that frame rate boost, and you jump up to 88 FPS on average? We don't quite break the 100 FPS mark, which is a shame, but given how poorly optimized and difficult to run Cyberpunk 2077 is, it's just such a complex game, that's perhaps no surprise. We also tested out, of course, Fortnite today. We did this at a multitude of different settings, from 1440p high to 1080p competitive. At 1440p high settings, we got 137 FPS on average. Not bad, not fantastic. It's not that 360 hertz kind of FPS extravaganza some of you will be after, but still a pretty solid result. Thankfully though, 1080p competitive settings was another story. I know this is the setting that a lot of you play Fortnite on, where you tune everything to low, except the render distance, which you set to far, but not epic, and then you enable NVIDIA's DLSS tech, an AI resolution scaler, to give you an FPS boost. In fact, we got 246 FPS on average, which means that boost was quite substantial. The game looked, of course, absolutely phenomenal as well, especially at the 1440p high res, but even 1080p low was actually not a bad visual experience. And on that note, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the performance figures for today's system, but the whole video. If you did enjoy this one, you know what to do. Make sure to drop a like rating, get subscribed if you want to see more from us. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.